I've been testing out a few different things on this channel since I started. Serious commentary, clip montages, satire, exploring possible directions for future projects. So, you can imagine my surprise when my Goblet of Fire video from 2021 saw a sudden spike in popularity for seemingly no reason other than the YouTube algorithm.
I love magic.
There were a lot of great comments on the video, but people couldn't seem to agree on what the worst Harry Potter film was. Or the best. So, here I am, trying to settle the debate once and for all. Just kidding, you're all going to hate my list. This is all Harry Potter films, ranked. Properly. Before we begin, Fantastic Beasts won't be part of this video. The reason being that I just don't care about those movies. I've seen the first two, they're not really my thing. It's rare that I'm interested in a spin-off, and those films are no exception. If you like them, great, but I'm not invested in them, and I feel that should disqualify me from talking about them. With that out of the way, let's get on to the ranking. Now, take the order of these films with a grain of salt. This isn't scientific, and ranking them is just a method for me to share my thoughts on these films. We'll go least favorite to favorite, since my least favorite is pretty obvious, and we can move on to the films that I'd much rather discuss.
The Goblet of Fire!
For those of you who are new here, I made a 27-minute long video detailing why I really don't like Goblet of Fire. The Cliff's Notes version is that it plays like a parody of Harry Potter and does a disservice to the story with its onslaught of stupid jokes, contrived drama, and weird character choices. I mean, like, why do Padma and Parvati talk in unison?
Hi, Harry.
Why does Madame Maxime eat a bug out of Hagrid's beard? Why do Fred and George fight each other? If Harry Potter were a big-budget Disney Channel original movie, it would look a lot like this, but without the charm. It's insultingly shallow, it's loaded with plot holes and scenes that go nowhere, and it belongs in Dante's Inferno.
Oh my god! I've killed Harry Potter!
Okay, that's done. From here on out, this is going to be a positive video. I think highly of each of the other 7 films, to varying degrees. In my opinion, there isn't another bad or even mediocre film in this bunch, but I definitely have my preferences.
A hidden chamber in this castle, known as the Chamber of Secrets.
A recurring theme in fan debate over the Harry Potter movies is the extent to which these films should follow the books. It's something of a conundrum. A movie adaptation, especially of a series with a deep lore and world like Harry Potter, should respect the source material and try not to deviate too much. But it's also a movie, not a novel, and shouldn't be afraid to make changes that better translate the source material to film. It's a very difficult needle to thread. And Chamber of Secrets follows the book almost page for page. And at their core, all of the Harry Potter books are mysteries wrapped up as fantasy stories, with some hero's journey and coming-of-age trappings for good measure. The film adaptation of Chamber of Secrets retains the central mystery of the story: who opened the Chamber of Secrets? And all the choices made move the story towards answering this question. I don't think later films have as tight of a focus on the mystery as Chamber does. They often choose to distill the book rather than build around the book's central plot. So is Chamber of Secrets good? Yes, because the book is good. Is it great? Like I said, more than any of the others, it follows the book and doesn't take many risks. Sorcerer's Stone brought the world to film, whereas Chamber of Secrets filmed the book. It's interesting that the cinema snobs among Harry Potter fans criticize later films for not having their own identities, while this one leans so heavily on what Sorcerer's Stone built. I'm never going to rank the books, by the way. They're designed to build on one another like a house of cards, and if I were to rank them, it would just be a list in chronological order. But that won't stop me from ranking the movies, and from putting Chamber of Secrets at number 7. When I rewatched the films to make this video, I actually enjoyed this more than I remembered, and I feel guilty putting it so low, but the simple fact is, I like all the films ahead of it better.
Oh, don't mind that. It's just the cat.
And what do you know about the Deathly Hallows?
I have to remind myself to separate the excitement I had at the theater watching Deathly Hallows Part 2 from the quality of the actual film, because it's one of the best movie-going experiences I've ever had. Midnight premieres were a cultural staple that we just don't get to enjoy anymore. And hey, the film itself is pretty good too. I'll get into this more later, but splitting Deathly Hallows into 2 films was a smart decision to avoid shortchanging the final chapter of the story. But it was also done for, financial considerations, and nowhere is that clearer than in this film. I definitely got a, this is supposed to be a big summer blockbuster vibe from this film that I didn't get from any of the others. It doesn't weaken it, but there are character moments that the movie leaves out or abridges in favor of big action scenes, of which there are no shortage. For the record, I'm glad it was a successful summer blockbuster. I don't want to live in a world where Transformers: Dark of the Moon was the highest grossing film of 2011.
What happened?
Everyone you care about, they are all dead.
Like the best blockbusters, the film blends action, humor, character, and heart. The highlight of the film, of course, is Snape's backstory. Montage was one technique that David Yates' films employed often, and none were better than The Prince's Tale. Despite that excellent sequence, this is probably a good time to bring up what might be my most controversial opinion on the Harry Potter series. I like Alan Rickman, and I think he did a good job as Snape, but I would have been interested to see someone else's take on the character.
They came to me to ask me to do Snape in the Harry Potter films, but that would be it, really. I'll be known for that, and I'd rather have a career that's completely bonkers.
In the books, Snape is a petty, immature jerk who regularly loses his cool at children and holds self-destructive grudges around things that happened decades ago, and you never really get that from Alan Rickman. In the films, he's mildly unpleasant and talks funny.
Will be treated as equally guilty.
I don't know how much of this was the writing and direction versus Rickman's performance, and again, he's an excellent actor who did a fine job with the role, but when people say they like Snape, 9 times out of 10, they mean they like Alan Rickman, to the point that his interpretation of the character has displaced the original text, and the impact of the character has been a bit watered down. And speaking of Snape...
Yes, I'm the Half-Blood Prince.
Okay, I spent a decent amount of time in the Goblet of Fire video explaining why Half-Blood Prince doesn't deserve to be called the worst Harry Potter film. And I'll reiterate what I said before. The cinematography is beautiful, and the warm yellow hues evoke a flickering candle. There are scenes that look like a painting, and the noir tone reflects the unease the characters feel. They are all back at Hogwarts, but things aren't the same, and their time there is drawing to a close. Even previously inviting locales like the Quidditch pitch look melancholy. In the Goblet of Fire video, I mentioned the mood went too dark too soon. Half-Blood Prince went for a darker, less saturated look at just the right chapter, with intentionality and depth that enrich the themes of the story. And if you've seen other films featuring Bruno Delbonnel's cinematography, you know how fortunate the Harry Potter series was to be lent his talent. The performances are top-notch and make you feel for even some of the less sympathetic characters, and there are a lot of scenes that are really funny, really touching, and everything in between. Usually when people criticize this film, they focus on the romantic subplot. But read the book again. It's the last point in the story where the characters are allowed to be teenagers and partake in all the drama that comes with it. And the film handles it with humor and class, for the most part.
Dragon Balls.
But it's not without issues. First, cutting so much of Voldemort's backstory. The present-day Voldemort doesn't appear at all in Half-Blood Prince book or film. In the book, that absence is made up for by his constant presence in the story, and the parallels between young Tom Riddle and other characters, namely Harry and Draco. The film tries to draw this parallel, but because of what was cut, we never fully grasp the lack of love in Tom Riddle's life, and how his connection to Hogwarts was not unlike Harry's. And by the end of the film, we never fully appreciate how Hogwarts isn't safe anymore, because the only person to suffer any negative repercussion from Death Eaters invading the castle is Dumbledore falling in slow motion. And what did they add in to make up for the cuts? This scene. On its own, I understand why it was added. The underlying threat the Death Eaters pose is difficult to translate from book to film. But after Bellatrix and Greyback attack and the burrow is on fire, nobody mentions it ever again. You're telling me that Hermione wouldn't rush to Ron to make sure he was okay after hearing about something like that? And then in the next film, good as new. They must have bought the Lego set. Remember what I said for Chamber of Secrets about how that movie did a great job focusing on the story's central mystery? Yeah, Half-Blood Prince doesn't seem too interested in the Half-Blood Prince. There's a lot to juggle in this film, and they dropped the ball there.
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Sorcerer's Stone.
What?
I had a hard time placing Sorcerer's Stone, because it seems so basic compared to what came later. I prefer many of the films after it, and yet Sorcerer's Stone laid the foundation for not just the 8-film series, but the entire multimedia Goliath that Harry Potter has become. Despite what I said about the first 2 movies being very similar, Chris Columbus was the perfect choice to direct this film, and his skill working with child actors comes through in their performances. For context, this film was considered a slam dunk at the box office, with directors like Steven Spielberg passing on the project because it was too easy. And I think it's because this film was considered such a sure thing, we take for granted just how much had to be introduced in this film, not the least of which was the Wizarding World itself. And with the advent of things like Universal Studios, I don't think it gets mentioned enough how immersive this Wizarding World felt, and how later films were more grounded in comparison. Obviously, in the early films, the Hogwarts students wear their school uniforms more, but also magical creatures like the Troll, Fluffy, Norbert, the Centaurs, and the Ghosts all serve to enrich Hogwarts and Harry's story, the kind of thing the series moved away from as it continued.
Hold on, it's coming back to me. He used to fly all over the place and he was...
Was it a poltergeist or something?
Peeves, that was his name. I was Peeves in Harry Potter.
The fact that they got so far as to cast an actor for Peeves, a role that ended up being cut, to me shows how much effort Columbus and his production team put in towards building this world and getting the details just right. I don't know how the rest of the series would have turned out had this strong foundation not been in place.
Thanks.
Anytime.
It should go without saying that the casting of both the adult and child characters was inspired, the state-of-the-art special effects brought Hogwarts and the Wizarding World to life, and John Williams' score imbued the film with purpose and emotion. This tone was never going to last for the whole series, but this film just feels cozy and warm. It's Harry Potter comfort food.
Original Order of the Phoenix.
After Mike Newell took a massive steaming goblet of fire, I didn't have much hope for Order of the Phoenix. I didn't trust the powers that be to embrace the book's political aspects, and expected the story to be dumbed down considerably. And while they were pretty ruthless in distilling the longest book into one of the shortest movies, they didn't miss any key plot elements or sacrifice the tone of the novel. Harry is the underdog here, and has to lead the students of Hogwarts from a vulnerable position, facing a smear campaign from the media and government meddling at his school. David Yates' Harry Potter films are usually criticized for being vanilla or boring, and I'd like to challenge that idea a bit. Yates was hired as director of Order of the Phoenix for his experience with political thrillers, so his films aren't necessarily going to have the whimsical tone of earlier entries. In general, the more Yates's films lean into the socio-political underpinnings of the series, the stronger they are. As in the book, the media is essentially its own character, as it is in all our lives, and some of the dialogue is certainly relevant today.
But that's insane. No one in their right mind could believe that Dumbledore...
Exactly the point. Fudge isn't in his right mind. It's been twisted and warped by fear. Now he's returned, and I'm afraid the Minister will do almost anything to avoid facing that terrifying truth.
I think if Yates had been a one-and-done director like Cuarón or Newell, he would be looked back on more fondly for his contribution to the series. As it stands, he and Warner Brothers made a strong team, and that relationship endured for well over a decade. And for a film series that had to produce a new entry every 2 years or so, this was critical. Yates was a steady hand at the wheel and finished the series without any hiccups. Yates was not the last television director to impress producers and be handed the keys to a major movie series, as Marvel Studios did almost the exact same thing with the Russo brothers a few years later. And despite working in a similar studio-driven franchise, I think Yates managed to leave more of a personal mark on his films than the average Marvel director is allowed. One thing that Order of the Phoenix does very well is highlight Harry's loneliness through its cinematography. At first, Harry feels isolated and isn't willing to share his burdens with anyone, even Ron and Hermione. As the film progresses and Harry finds purpose in his friends, he is more often joined by them, ultimately fighting alongside them in the Department of Mysteries at the end of the film. And despite his losses, he emerges with a strong sense of community. As with the best Harry Potter films, it's the characters that elevate Order of the Phoenix, particularly the relationship between Harry and Sirius. After Goblet of Fire only gave them one half-assed exposition dump together, Order of the Phoenix had some catch-up work to do. They had to create a believable friendship that would make an impact when Sirius is taken from Harry.
I just feel so angry all the time.
You're a very good person who bad things have happened to. When all this is over, we'll be a proper family. We'll see.
I mean, damn, they succeeded. And I can't get through this video without mentioning Dolores Umbridge. This was a role they absolutely had to knock out of the park, as, despite Voldemort, she's really the main antagonist of both the book and film.
That's right. Because you know, deep down, you deserve to be punished.
And Imelda Staunton is incredible. She wears the gaudiest pink, has the most obnoxious laugh, and her theme is vaguely reminiscent of Bernard Herrmann's Psycho. Although he's not as big a name as other composers for the series, Nicholas Hooper did a great job with 5 and 6, and it's a shame that he hasn't had much film work since. And for as small as the action set pieces are in this movie, the duel between Voldemort and Dumbledore is one of the best scenes in the series. This is a movie that's gotten better and better each time I've watched it, and I think it'll continue to age incredibly well.
He's a murderer. Got himself locked up in Azkaban for it.
Now this is what would be number 1 on most film buffs lists. It's directed by an auteur in Alfonso Cuarón, has the best musical score in the series courtesy of John Williams, and is where the film started to take a darker turn. I love this movie, and it's probably the one I've rewatched the most times. It would be much, much easier to list the things I don't like about the film, which basically boil down to 2 things. First, there are a lot of little moments here and there where it feels like the film is trying to be creepy and weird for the sake of being creepy and weird. Some might not consider this a negative or just a directorial flourish, and none of these things on their own are bad, but after so much of it, I started to notice how much the film goes out of its way to be quirky. It's not jarring, but it does stand out from the other films. But the larger issue is that this is the point where Warner Brothers stopped making these movies for general audiences and started making them for fans of the books. Maybe someone who hadn't read the books before seeing the movies could have a different perspective on this, but I'd imagine it would be very confusing to watch this movie, never learn who Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs were, or their connection to the story, and then hear them referenced in later films as though it had been explained.
Padfoot? What is Padfoot? Well, what is hidden? What is he talking about, Snape?
Again, this is not the only Harry Potter film guilty of this, but it is the first to leave huge chunks of the plot missing for the uninitiated, and there was no going back from there. But every scene is filled with heart. This could have been a throwaway of a movie, given how it's less connected to the main plot of the series, but Prisoner of Azkaban instead uses its runtime for Harry to learn about the family he never had, while finding those bonds with other characters.
She had a way of seeing the beauty in others, even and perhaps most especially when that person could not see it in themselves.
Bearing in mind that this movie came out years before the final book, scenes like this show how well the director and screenwriter understood Harry Potter.
And you can always find in here. Well, it's the sign of the Deathly Hallows, of course.
The what?
The what? The Deathly Hallows.
Before Breaking Dawn, before Mockingjay, before The Hobbit, Warner Brothers made the decision to split Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows into 2 films. Nowadays, splitting one book into multiple films, or hell, one film into multiple films, is seen as trite and a cynical cash grab. And while this was the first major blockbuster to do this, it had been brewing for a while. A few years earlier, Warner Brothers had considered splitting Goblet of Fire into 2 films, and honestly, they should have. I don't know how they would have turned out given the creative choices that were made with the existing film, but it would have served the story no matter who the director was. But for Deathly Hallows, they finally bit the bullet, and I think it's the 2-part adaptation that illustrates the major challenges Warner Brothers had in adapting Harry Potter to film. If Deathly Hallows had been 1 film rather than 2, the lion's share of the cuts probably would have come from what is now Part 1. It would have been a rip-roaring adventure from Privet Drive to Hogwarts with minimal camping, and in doing so, sacrificed the heart and soul that the series is remembered for. For me, the benefit of splitting the final book into 2 films wasn't in adapting as much as possible from the pages to film as earlier films had done, but in finally allowing the movies to breathe, spend a meaningful amount of time with its characters, and flesh out their relationships. And the characters and their relationships are the whole reason I love Harry Potter, Nick Cave song and all. And moments like those are necessary, as this is a far bleaker and less magical film than any others in the series. The characters travel through real-world locations that are decidedly non-whimsical, as their own magical world has been corrupted. This harsh realism is reflected in the film's use of handheld camera, which it uses to great effect in some key scenes. And again, David Yates' films are strongest when they embrace the political aspects of Harry Potter. The trio's infiltration of the Ministry is probably the best example of this in the series, and brings the fascist coup of the Ministry to unsettling life. And some truly horrific scenes drive home just how dire the situation is for the wizarding world and those fighting to restore it. And I have to give a shout out to the deleted scenes. I understand why these aren't included in the theatrical cut of the film, but they add so much character depth from the books that a lot of the films were missing.
You didn't just lose a mother that night in Godric's Hollow, you know. I lost a sister.
The only major omission that, as far as I know, wasn't filmed is Wormtail's death. But my suspicion is that this decision came from above rather than from the creative team. Deathly Hallows Part 1 was far from beloved when it came out, as most fans were already looking to their big summer blockbuster, and most of the negativity from critics amounted to, this was all just set up for Part 2. Yet, over the years, critics and fans have started to see the value it brings to the series.
I don't think you're a waste of space.
And here it is, sitting up at number 1, while Part 2 is down at number 6. Almost as if it isn't just a setup, and is a great movie in its own right.
Dobby is a free elf.
Deathly Hallows Part 1 is essentially a post-apocalyptic story. A road movie, where the characters are clinging to one last spark of hope, as they deal with conflict within the group and within themselves. Better than any Harry Potter film, it captures the hopeless feeling of being alone while bearing a huge burden, and the losses that occur along the way. And the Tale of the Three Brothers segment is a beautiful work that was only possible through the medium of film. While I love almost all of the Harry Potter films as they are, seeing what was accomplished with Deathly Hallows made me curious as to what a future adaptation of the series could be like. It's not something I'd want in 5 or even 10 years, but if 20 years from now, HBO did a Harry Potter series of, let's say, 1 season per book, 10 episodes per season, I'd be totally on board.
You serious?
And so along with being a well-paced, character-focused film, Deathly Hallows Part 1 gives a peek at what was and is possible with the film series beyond just indefinitely mining it for content.
These are dark times, there is no denying.
It's the true coming-of-age portion of the Harry Potter mythos, and is my choice for Best Harry Potter Movie. So, what do you think? Was I too hard on Chamber of Secrets? Is Order of the Phoenix as good as I make it sound? Get in those comments, and don't forget to subscribe.
Spoken like a true politician.
I never know what video I'm going to do next, but I'll try not to make too much of a mess.